Touhou Fan Game Jam 11 is here, and the theme this time was Immortality. It sounds like a strange theme at first, but once you start diving into the fan games, it starts to make a lot of sense. My team also made a fan game for this jam, but I'll be talking about the other games from the jam instead. There were over 45 games, and I'm not going to cover all of them, but I will cover a good chunk. As usual, I'll do a quick fire round of some of the games, and then talk about more with some in-depth thoughts. Let's dive into some Immortality-themed Touhou fan games. Undying Memoir is a precision platformer where you play as Moko. It features some interesting level designs and mechanics that make use of an air dash, and has retellings of important Kaguya and Moko lore as rewards for beating levels. It's a cool framing device. Moko's Forest Defense is a game where you defend yourself against invading Lunarian rabbits with different moves. This game was actually made by a viewer of the channel as one of their first games. I think that's pretty cool. Tewi's Funhouse is a platformer starring Moko, yeah, there's a lot of her this jam, where you have to navigate Tewi's diabolical traps with Moko's immortality. How can she do it? Well, Moko's immortal, so she can damage boost through. Shiraiden Survivors is a Vampire Survivors-like made by someone who's never actually played Vampire Survivors. Despite that, it's actually really fun, with a lot of nice variation from power-ups and weapons. More, The Adventures of Tenshi is a turn-based roguelite where you fight through Yuka's garden as Tenshi. A life system allows for this game to fit the feeling of immortality. There's a lot of strategy involved with figuring out which upgrades will serve you better. Do you try to increase your max health and go for passives, or do you just try to max out your attack power? The Great Horai Heist is a shmup where you try to escape with the stolen Horai elixir with Marissa. If you get enough elixir from enemies, you can boost into Immortality mode, which allows you to accumulate a lot of points. It's a neat mechanic that keeps the game fast-paced. Cherno's Timeless Cooking is a recipe game where you have to try to make Moko food that will add some excitement back into her life. This game has the unique twist of Moko's acceptable recipes being very weird since she's tried almost everything, which is pretty funny. Would also like to note that the aesthetics in this game are on point. Moko's Escort Service is a shmup game starring Moko and Kaguya where you try to get through the bamboo forest against swarms of enemies. This game has the unique mechanic of having to manage 2 hitboxes, which makes dodging trickier than standard Touhou. Melting Memories is a top-down game starring Moko where you have to try to find Kaguya's treasures. It's inspired by Hotline Miami, but a lot of it actually involves stealth, with you sneakily taking out enemies when they're out of sight. Recklessness is a platformer, flight game starring Moko. With enough speed, you can take into the sky. I wasn't that good at it, but with enough mastery, you can likely zoom across the entire game. Immortality 101 is the first Touhou fan game I've ever played that stars Mizuichi. It actually takes place in sync with where cheating Detective Satori is right now, and has you hopping between different bodies to dodge down Maku. It's a very unique mechanic that helps to create quite a challenging game. On the Immortal Snail Assassin is a Flash-style game starring Yachi where you run from a snailified On. It's based on the idea of getting millions of dollars in exchange for always having to run from an immortal snail assassin. You weave between different traps and hazards. On chases Yachi after her role in Touhou 19. Yeah, only a few weeks later, and we already have fan games that are influenced by 19. It's pretty cool. Primal and Phantasmal is a Danmoku engine game starring Mima where you fight against Anoko. There's a story centered around wanting to look over Marissa and some new Danmaku patterns based on Anoko's fight from 19. Everything comes together to create a solid game. Chasing Immortality stars Marissa and Beaten as they run away from Tenshi after stealing her Immortality Peach. The art in this game is really funny, and the game loop is simple, but effective. Unrelated but with a similar concept, the Journey to the West stars Beaten wandering around a randomly generated world after eating one of Tenshi's peaches. The game features an upgrade system after getting energy. It's a lot of mechanics thrown together into one experience that surprisingly works. Pages of Light is a point-and-click game starring Moko where you go around Gensokyo to try to find Kane's missing pages. It's a pretty relaxing game with a Moko that feels more at peace with herself. The art is also very nice. The Great Fairy Cataclysm is a semi-auto RTS where the fairies have to join forces to save Gensokyo after a giant cataclysm. The variety of art for the different fairies is cool, and it's satisfying to slowly grow your army up to take down the enemy. And lastly, Kill Love Fireproof is a multiplayer versus bullet hell a la Maiden and Spell. There is an online play, but there is a CPU for single player. This type of genre fits Touhou really well, and it's executed nicely here. Alright, now that Quickfire's done, let's take a look at some games in depth. 500,000 Days of Thunder is a story-based game starring Tojiko. It uses a unique art style reminiscent of old Atari games. The gameplay is mainly just walking around and exploring the area, but thanks to the art, what you see is left to your imagination like those old Atari games. You play as Tojiko while she's sealed away before the events of Touhou 13. She reflects on her state as a ghost, and also thinks about what immortality really means. There's a nice introspection on how her personality helps shape how her life itself extends. This is a story that has made Tojiko a lot more popular with readers, and I highly recommend giving the game a play. Aku Skytrip is a puzzle platformer where you play as Aku. The creator Waria spent a lot of time making an Aku model that he's pretty happy with. There's a nice mix of Japanese saga that plays in the background. The gameplay is also built on a killer premise. Literally. You have to kill Aku to do things like press switches and leave safe platforms over spikes. It's a really funny and creative mechanic, though it can lead to some awkward jumps. Also, this glitch happened, which was kinda cool. Check this game out if you want some goofy puzzles. Touhou Dream Picross is a Picross game with story scenes. Now, I didn't know how to play Picross before I started this game, but it made me a huge fan. You use deductive reasoning in conjunction with Minesweeper-style hints to create a picture out of blocks. The first few puzzles in this game are fun to solve, and took me quite a bit of time. The story scenes are also accompanied by gorgeous art and intriguing writing. But the fifth puzzle has a huge difficulty spike and also contains false solutions, which I wasn't too big on. That being said, I enjoyed my time with the game to the point where I started playing other Picross games. If you love Picross or are interested in learning, give this game a shot. Jelly Stacker was a surprise hit from this jam. It stars Eika and has you stacking stones on top of each other like Jenga. There's a silly remix of Eika's theme in the background, and she has an adorable flying animation that's stylized like a jellyfish. The stacking mechanics are also surprisingly intuitive. There's a lot of weaving taking place with your jellyfish-like movement, and the task of balancing everything on top of each other properly is charming. While it doesn't have much to do with the theme, it's still a really fun time. This is the second time a jam has had a really good Eika game, and I'm all here for it. Reconstructing Haniwa is a shmup made by Konsu, who's known for having some of the most creative games for each jam. This game's no different, and I needed a special screen capture to show what it even does properly. You play as Mayumi defending the Beast Metropolis from the Touhou 17 Pro tags. The Immortality comes into play because when you get hit, you don't lose a life. Instead, a body part falls off, and you, the player, have to drag them back together by connecting other computer windows together. This is an insane gameplay loop reminiscent of old DS games that will test your ability to multitask. Plus, there's an online leaderboard. If you want a unique game unlike any jam game you've played before, check out Reconstructing Haniwa. Eternity by Saishoo is one of two games this jam just called Eternity. I'll just Roll some footage and let the game explain itself.
Aya felt her consciousness fade, and she awoke holding up a boulder trapped in the blood-red landscape.
The Onley parable is based on the Stanley parable. It stars An as she wakes up one day to the beginnings of an incident. It's a short game, but still manages to capture a lot of the Stanley parable style charm with its multiple endings, and meta commentary about how the player progresses through the game. It also has narration that's very soothing to listen to, and works with the humor.
Look, there's nothing in the woods. There can't be. I'm just trying to tell a story here. Is that so bad? Just go to the front of the shrine.
Hedea no Aku's Nocturnal Discordant Symposium has a little secret to its name. Remove Aku, and you're left with the abbreviation NDS. I mentioned earlier how reconstructing Haniwa reminded me of a DS game. Well, that's not the only DS reminiscent submission of this jam. This game is framed as if it were a lost Nintendo DS game. You play as Aku and record Moko and Kaguya's battle. To record it, you draw the shapes of the bullets that come on screen. Circles, triangles, lines, and hearts for lives. The framing device is elevated by quality gameplay. Thinking about what it took to make a system that accurately captured variations of shapes is kinda mind-boggling. Try this one and draw an Amogus. Trust me. Disability, incapable of letting anything escape from your grasp, is a puzzle game starring Hisami. She tries to drag immortals down to hell to get scolded by Zanmu. For those who haven't played Touhou 19 yet, yes, Hisami really is like this in canon. This game takes block pushing and combines it with sticky long-range grabs to create a lot of intricate puzzles. A lot of people, myself included, spent over an hour getting through the game and all of its tricky solutions. Every answer makes sense though, and the game is accompanied by some fantastic art and a nice remix of Hisami's theme. If you want a challenge, then play this game. Eternity by Shruby is the second game this jam called Eternity. This one is a simple visual novel made in Ren'Py. There aren't character sprites or music, but what we do have is an insanely well-written story that delves into the backstories of Sanai, and especially Sakuya. The Sakuya story is so well written that in my mind, this is where I like to think her origin comes from now. It's rare for a game to be carried solely by the quality of its writing, but this manages to do so. I Don't Want to Be the Taoist is a game in a similar style to I Want to Be the Guy. You play as Miko as she journeys to try to get her hands on the Horai Elixir 2. You're faced with super precise platforming that requires careful use of wall jumps and speed control. But you can also make use of Miko's past attempts to do things like activate arrows before you begin, at the expense of having a harder initial field to navigate. It's very hard, but also fun to execute properly. This is probably the hardest non-puzzle game in this jam, so if you want a true reflex test, try this game. Antidote of Immortality is a shmup with a heavy emphasis on storytelling. You play as Marissa and take on her quest to help Inoko free herself from immortality. The story scenes are accompanied by some absolutely gorgeous artwork. It's crazy to think this was made in 3 days. We get to learn more about Marissa's perspective on immortality, and delve into the mindset of Inoko. The gameplay also has an equally charming low-poly model style, with some nice lighting illuminating the stages. But the level design can feel a bit unfair, with a few blind turns. Extremely quick reflexes are also needed to dodge oncoming obstacles. I died to the first enemy around 5 times while trying to get my bearings. But the gameplay does provide some unique twists, like how Marissa's shot gets weaker as she grows older, which both increases the game's difficulty and ties the gameplay directly into storytelling. This is an insanely impressive game for 3 days of work, and the story is fascinating. Definitely check this game out. Immortality Nexus, Aku's Boundless Adventure, is a 2D platformer starring Aku. First off, this game, like the last one, is also gorgeous. The hand-drawn style oozes with charm, and keeps the game feeling pretty cheery despite its mechanics. Like the other Aku game, you progress through this game by dying. It's framed as Aku wanting to visit Aente, and she doesn't care how many lifetimes it takes. So, she might plant a seed, and then die so that in her next life, the plant will have grown large enough for her to climb over it. She might also leave a trail of crystals for her next lives to help them pass blind jumps. The concepts are extremely creative, but Aku's one-hit death and some slightly stiff controls also means that the game can be a bit frustrating sometimes. But overall, I had a good time. Patchy's Pizza is quite surreal. This game's made by Willman, who employs their signature comedic writing style in a surprisingly bleak setting. Patchy's run out of pizza, so she ventures out to find more in this Yume Nikki-inspired game. But as you explore, you find a Gensokyo very different from the one you're familiar with. The game does an impeccable job with its world building despite using an art style that's normally tailored to make cute things. You can find items and talk to the few people remaining. And what you talk about is, well, the dialogue manages to feel philosophical yet remain hilarious at the same time. So if you like Wario, like cool world building, or just want a good laugh, then check out Patchy's Pizza. Pong is an entry that was made in an hour due to some unfortunate communication errors, but it ended up being one of the most memorable games of the jam. I don't really want to spoil what it does, so instead, I'm just here to tell you to play this game last if you decide to check out jam games. In the Chambers of Immortality is a Super Meat Boy-styled platformer starring Moko. It's from a team led by jam veteran Trace, who's known for making extremely polished games. This game has that polish, and features some tight platforming with a lot of crazy mobility. The aesthetic is pretty gnarly, and there's a cool remix of Immortal Smoke that plays as you journey through Kaguya's torture dungeon. You might die a lot on your first few attempts, but it feels satisfying to finally get a smooth run to clear a section. The game ended up being so fun that there was a contest in the Touhou Game Dev Hub to get the world record, with Metal Daka ending up taking the final time. It even has a speedrun.com page set up. For its polish, the fun factor, and the meta that spawned around it, this is a must-play. A Call is a Sega Genesis game made by T-Body. As per usual, I don't mean Sega Genesis inspired. I mean an actual Sega Genesis game you can play on real hardware if you have a flash card. The Jam version comes with a boot sequence. I love retro games, so I had a great time with this one. The aesthetics match my taste perfectly, with the signature Genesis twang for the music and the pixel sprites for the characters. The story backing the game of Aaron having to make the Horai Elixir also adds a coolness factor. The gameplay involves going through dark areas, sneaking past lunar security to get ingredients. If you're not fast enough, enemies can start closing in. It's a balancing act of avoiding the already existing enemies, taking shots if you have enough time, and escaping to get to the end. There's also boss fights that completely change the game's flow. This was a fantastic experience all the way through, and it's a must-play. Hyper Fairies is a roguelike from a team led by resident roguelike enjoyer, Iced Lemon. As you might know, for every jam I've made a video on, I featured all of Iced Lemon's games that were in them. An Iced Lemon game can be many things, but a lot of the time it means an experience designed around scoring, with mechanics anchoring the core of the quality. Here, you have an almost sort of puzzle game fused with action, as you deal with infinite fairies and dodge bullets. After destroying enough fairies, you can choose an upgrade, but the fairies also get an upgrade. It's like the game Shotgun King. So, you balance how you want to power yourself up, and also try to make sure the enemies don't get too overwhelming. There's also a power system, bombs, scoring, and... wow, there's a lot to learn. But thanks to the intuitive controls of the mouse and arrows, as well as the simplicity of don't die, it never feels like you're lost. Navigating your way through Hyper Fairies is a joy. There's a lot of strategy involved with how you want to play, and it's fun learning how to score with all these mechanics in mind. You know what I'm about to say. Must play. Immortality Paradox is the last game I'll be covering this jam. This game is from a team that includes Eastern Mouse and Ferdy's Lab, two talented game designers that have a history of making top-notch games. When it starts, you're playing as Moko through a relaxing platformer level. Like the Super Marissa Land games, there's a little portrait on the left that changes with power-ups and expressions. As you progress through, you eventually hear Kaguya, who's upset that Moko's in her game. And then the game resets, and... this game uses the Immortality spin to create troll levels. If Moko's immortal, then she has infinite lives to retry against the trolls over and over again. It's a very funny concept that plays around with meta-narrative at points, but importantly, it's not Kaizo. Kaizo would require the player to do pixel-precise tricks to progress. Instead, this is you trying to outthink Kaguya's design. I love when games combine storytelling and gameplay, and I think this game does it perfectly. For the jam games, there's rating categories like gameplay, writing, challenge, art, audio, and use of theme. A lot of games excel at one or two, which makes sense. Trying to focus on all of these categories could lead to everything suffering. But there are some teams who do manage to achieve a best of everything, and I think this is one of those rare games. This was my favorite game of the jam, so of course, it's a must-play. And that was my overview of Touhou Fan Game Jam 11. This had the most games I've ever covered in one video. I hope you ended up finding something you liked. There's also a link to the Game Jam's page in the description so you can play and rate games. Oh, and if you want to know where to start, I also compiled a timeline of every Game Jam game in chronological order. This was kinda just for fun. It helped me with framing the script, and I'm guessing it would also be a cool order to play the games. There will be a link to that as well. As always, great work to everyone who submitted a game.